Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. Today we'll be discussing the first year of President Trump at the White House and his military around the world with Ariel Gold, activist, community organizer, and national co-director of the Code Pink organization. Ariel Gold, a warm welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Ariel, what is your assessment of the first year of President Trump at the White House?
Well, it's really a disaster on all kinds of issues, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy. One of the first things that President Trump did when he came into office was authorized a massive sale of weapons to the regime of Saudi Arabia, which is used on the population of Yemen to cause just insurmountable destruction. And recently, one of the most recent things that he's done in terms of foreign policy was the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And this has immediately resulted in quite a bit of unrest in the Middle East, and the ramifications are long coming. So it's a really destructive force. We've also been watching his fight with North Korea, which puts the entire world at risk of nuclear annihilation. This has been a tumultuous first year, and it doesn't forebode well for the year that we're now beginning off.
Donald Trump has proposed a 10% increase in the military spending. We're talking about $54 billion, slashing social programs such as education, healthcare, childhood assistance, and so on and so forth. Is the military in the U.S. a key part of the economy, and it's very important to keep the military machine moving?
Well, that depends on who you're speaking with. So if you ask weapons companies in the U.S., if you're asking Lockheed Martin or Boeing, General Dynamics, whether the military war machine is an important American industry, absolutely they're going to tell you yes, because military companies in the U.S. make a killing off of killing. On the other hand, if you ask the civilian populations around the world who are getting bombed, either by the longest war in U.S. history, the war in Afghanistan, by U.S. forces, or by U.S. weapons, for example, used by Saudi Arabia on the people of Yemen, or used by Israel on the Palestinian population, we're going to say, no, this is not an important industry.
So when basically you're watching the mass media, the way that the official line is presented about why the U.S. Is all over the world in terms of military presence. Basically, they're saying, most of all, democracy, freedom, and so on and so forth. They say, that's what we are fighting for, that's what we are fighting for, that's what we are there for. Is it right that the military presence of the U.S. around the world is to preserve or to promote democracy and quote-unquote freedom?
Well, what we see in general is that after the U.S. military goes into a country, we see a lot more instability. And in the immediate, we of course see a massive amount of death. The results for the country are usually not good. And again, I would say this is really about the industry making money off of itself. So, is democracy increasing in the case of Yemen? Absolutely not. What's happening is the largest humanitarian disaster of modern history.
And in terms of the first year of President Trump, more or less military presence of the U.S. around the world?
Well, as you said, Trump has been intent on increasing the military budget. In December 2017, he signed a massive, I think it was $700 million spending bill to the military. And at the same time, we saw the tax bill, which was also signed in December, which gutted such things as health care to the most needy in America. So it's a question of priorities, whether we want to take care of our people here in the U.S. or if we want to take care of our weapons companies. And for the Trump administration, definitely weapons companies are the priority.
According to Bernie Sanders, the U.S. is living an incredible disparity between rich and poor. We're talking about the 0.1% is getting about 40% of all the tax reduction, for example, in the new tax plan. 99% of the people getting poorer or the middle class going downhill. How come the U.S. population, the massive 99%, is letting this happen?
Well, I would say this is often a question of media and how this is
So the media
portrayed.
is part of the problem?
Well, the American public, when they elected Trump and and when the part of the public that continues to support Trump is often acting, as Bernie Sanders himself says, against their own best interests. So destroying programs like health care and giving tax cuts to the rich is not in the interest of the 99%.
So how democratic is the country then?
Well, we have, a propaganda campaign that encourages people often to think that this is in their interest. And we could talk a lot about how democratic or undemocratic the U.S. is, including our election process.
What do you think?
Which, well, quite frankly, we had one candidate that won the popular vote and the other that ended up in office. So immediately you have a problem right there. We also have an enormous amount of lobbying efforts. We can look again at the weapons industry. We can also look at pharmaceutical companies, if we're talking healthcare, and the impact that those have on our government and the impact that they have in undermining the democratic process.
In terms of military, what concerns you the most about what the U.S. is presenting like their allies and partners?
Well, there's so much to be concerned about under this administration, but we could begin by looking at one of the U.S.'s largest allies right now, the country of Saudi Arabia. We are looking at a country that gives almost no rights to the women in the country. Just this year in Saudi Arabia, women were given the right to drive. Still, women must have a male guardian's permission in order to attend school, in order to work, and to travel, all kinds of things. Saudi Arabia is using U.S. weapons to wage one of the worst wars that we have seen on the country of Yemen. The situation in Yemen right now is so bad that every 10 minutes a child in Yemen dies of malnutrition. And we have the largest cholera outbreak in modern history because medical supplies simply can't get in through the port, which is under blockade of Saudi Arabia. We could also look at one of the U.S.'s largest allies, the country of Israel, which purports itself to be the only democracy in the Middle East. However, just on January 7th, Israel announced a ban of 20 organizations,
including yours,
including ours, Code Pink, from being allowed to enter the country due to our support for an entirely nonviolent movement of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is a tool in the tradition of the Montgomery bus boycott during the Civil Rights era in the United States, in the tradition of the farm workers' lettuce boycott, led by immigrant farm workers in the United States, and in the tradition of the movement to end apartheid in South Africa. Now, despite many, many actions by the state of Israel that are enormously repressive, this only being the most recent. The U.S. continues to give $3.8 billion
the largest
a year
aid of military aid in the world.
To any country. We give the most to Israel. And this is actually an issue that's mostly quite bipartisan. So right before President Obama left office, he had actually increased U.S. military aid to Israel from 3.1 billion to 3.8 billion. And now the Trump administration is really doing their best to show that they are the strongest supporters of Israel. So it's just a one-up, but it's actually across the board in terms of Democrats and Republicans.
So what do you think
the
about
US.
the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians?
Sure. Well, that's actually the issue that I work most closely on. In 1948, Israel performed an ethnic cleansing on the people of Palestine, where 700,000 Palestinians were removed from their lands. These people from 1948 and their successive generations are still asking for their right to return to their homes and lands, which is supposed to be guaranteed to them under international law. For the past 50 years, Israel has then been carrying out a brutal military occupation of the West Bank, of Gaza, and of East Jerusalem. And just in the past less than 10 years, has engaged in 3 brutal military assaults on the embattled enclave of Gaza. And right now we're watching things really speed up over there following President Trump's announcement of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That announcement is a slap in the face to both the Palestinian population there, but also to Muslims around the world. Jerusalem is supposed to be, under international law, an international city because it's a city that is holy to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. But President Trump is supporting the most right-wing and extreme of the Israeli government to claim Jerusalem for only themselves.
And in terms of what could you expect for 2018 regarding that conflict, Palestinians and Israel?
Well, we hope to see any possibility of stopping the Trump administration from moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Will take about 3 to 4 years at the least.
Right, so we're going to be trying to put the brakes onto that process because
probably Donald Trump is not going to be in office anymore at that point.
Let's hope. We have just watched a new bill in the Knesset, in the Israeli Knesset, that makes it harder to achieve an equal status in Jerusalem. So we're going to be watching that closely. And since President Trump came into office, the right-wing government of Israel has been even more emboldened. So they have increased construction of their illegal settlements and just feel that they can go further and further in imposing an apartheid regime. You
wrote in the Huffington Post, and I quote the title of the article, you say, "There is nothing fantastic about Sisi's role in murdering his own people." What are we talking about?
Sure. Well, Egypt is another country, another repressive country that the U.S. Provides both diplomatic and financial support for. Egypt is a country where journalists are attacked and where there have been mass killings of civilians, and yet it remains a country that receives U.S. support.
The second largest.
Second largest, yes.
So basically you were concerned that the President Sisi was violating all types of human rights.
Absolutely. And we were asking for, we continue to ask for aid to be cut to Israel as well as Egypt.
In terms of clandestine prisoners and clandestine prisons of the U.S. around the world, do you think that are still going on?
We're still working on trying to get Guantanamo to be closed down, and President Trump, during his election campaign, promoted the use of waterboarding, which is a recognized form of torture, and promised to keep Guantanamo open. So we have a big fight ahead of us. Just this week, here in Washington, D.C., a group called Witness Against Torture, which Code Pink is a supporter of, are having a hunger strike for political prisoners of the U.S. around the world.
What about human rights, respect of human rights inside the U.S. by the government and through the military actions around the world? Do the U.S. respect human rights?
Well, certainly not in the military actions around the world. There is nothing about the killing of civilians, the targeting of civilian populations. There is nothing about using remote-controlled drones to bomb wedding parties and hospitals, which has all too often taken place, that is respectful of human rights. And here domestically, inside the U.S., I would say that there is nothing respecting of human rights about removing people's health care, about deporting immigrants, or about building a border wall with Mexico.
Regarding your organization, you are the co-director of Code Pink, and you have been arrested more than once for what they call it the civil disobedience. Tell me a little bit about your anecdotes.
Sure. So Code Pink, we are a women-led organization, a grassroots organization that opposes U.S. militarism and seeks to bring those funds that are spent on the U.S. military instead to such things as education and health care, infrastructure, the very services that we need. And at Code Pink, we use a lot of color and light and creativity, and we also believe in putting our bodies on the line. In a long tradition of the effectiveness that civil disobedience has had, from Dr. Martin Luther King, who used civil disobedience during the fight for civil rights in America, through a lot of others. So I myself have been arrested in U.S. Congress opposing the Israeli occupation of Palestine and U.S. support for that. I've also been arrested within the country of Israel by their Israeli military there, while also protesting for human rights. And many of the members of Code Pink have been arrested numerous times. And our real goal in this case is to bring awareness to what is happening.
And do you feel safe?
Well, as I have American citizenship and I am a white American, so I come into this with quite a lot of privilege, which leaves me in a very different position than others if they were doing these same actions would be. Somebody who is undocumented in the U.S. does not have the same type of safety to engage in civil disobedience. And people of color are not as safe in the U.S. or LGBTQ individuals. So I try to use the privilege that I have well.
So that means that there is discrimination in this country?
There is an enormous system of racism here in this country. Israel also, but the U.S. was built on a system of racism. The U.S. is built on, it's a settler colonial enterprise, as we call it. Built on white supremacy, built on the ethnic cleansing of the native people here in the U.S., and slavery. And those traditions continue through today. And we see them very much in the Trump administration.
I see that you were also very concerned about climate change, and also you brought, for example, to sort of town meeting with former candidate Hillary Clinton your concerns. Tell me about that.
Sure. So I will begin with Hillary Clinton. I split my time personally between Washington, D.C. and my hometown of Ithaca, New York. And there was a town hall meeting being held by Chelsea Clinton, Hillary Clinton's daughter, during the election where Hillary Clinton was running for election. And so Hillary Clinton is somebody who has been incredibly supportive of both the Saudi Arabia regime and also the actions of the State of Israel. And so during Chelsea Clinton's talk, I went up to the front of the room with a banner that said "End support for repressive regimes," and decided to use the stage to educate the audience about what was happening and what we need to do as a people.
And climate change is an issue that mostly you will say that it's one of the big issues pending, one of the largest pending matters in the U.S.?
Well, it's one of the largest pending issues in the world. There are none of us in the world that can escape climate change. There is no amount of money that the 1% can have that will buy them out of the repercussions of climate change. And the U.S. military and weapons companies are one of the largest polluters. So that's specifically an issue if you are concerned about the military.
Your organization also is involved in a program regarding remodeling housing.
Sure. I think you're referring to our Remodel REMAX campaign, and this is also an issue around Palestinian rights. So REMAX is a US-based global real estate company, and one of the places where they sell homes around the world are in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem in Palestine. And these homes are advertised and sold in illegal settlements. Illegal settlements in Palestine are designated as Jewish only. They are built on stolen Palestinian land, and their construction undermines any hope of a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So for a number of years now, we have been trying to persuade, through some creative means, trying to persuade REMAX to stop selling homes on stolen land in these settlements.
How successful have you been?
Well, they've certainly noticed us. REMAX no longer has their shareholder meetings in public anymore because we attended them and spoke out during them. And this, about a year and a half ago, the CEO of REMAX made an announcement that they would no longer be receiving profits from these settlement properties. However, we haven't seen the actual verification of that yet, and for us, profits aren't enough. We actually want them to stop selling the homes in those territories, but it does let us know that they are aware of us and quite afraid of the campaign.
Do you think that President Trump is going to finish his term?
I certainly hope not. So far, President Trump has been a dangerous president for all of us. We have seen in America under President Trump an enormous rise in racism, an enormous number of attacks on those who are most vulnerable, and really an escalation of putting the entire world in peril, of increasing wars and the military budget, and destroying diplomatic means such as gutting the State Department and gutting necessary social services. So it is my hope that we don't see the completion of this president's term.
Ariel Gold, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.